Hello and welcome to Model Aviation Live. I'm Jay Smith, Executive Editor of Model Aviation and Park Pilot magazines, and happy to have the last show with you for 2020. The first thing that I wanted to share with you all before we get to our guests is I wanted to make sure we talked about this earlier this week on AMA Air, and I wanted to mention it again that we at AMA are experiencing mail delays, much like I'm sure everyone else is. In fact, we have received renewals that when people are mailing renewals in to renew their membership, we have received renewals this week that were postmarked at the end of November. So in some cases, it could be taking 2 weeks or more. And we actually received a letter from the post office to the magazine, and it was dated November 9th. And we just got it this week. So I wanted to share with you that we are processing membership renewals on a daily basis. And the magazine is going out on time. But if you don't receive it when you normally do, it's due to mail delays. And we're hearing sometimes 2 to 3 week delays in mail. So just wanted to make you aware of that. So please be patient if you're waiting for your renewal for your membership, or you're waiting for the magazine. Those are all going out as normal. And it's just a delay with the mail that's causing that. And I also shared with you 2 weeks ago on the last show that the majority of AMA is working from home. I can tell you that the entire magazine staff is working from home. But as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, we're able to get our email. We're able to get our phone calls. The only thing again, that might be delayed is, of course, mail, if you actually mail us something. But, any communications, we're still working and available to you. And as part of that, with me working from home, I basically had to turn my dining room table into a photo studio because I'm still working on reviews and product information. So I've got a couple of photos I can share with you of some of the things that I'm working on. One is a 1/8 scale Arma Notorious. So that right there in front of you is a review for Park Pilot, because as you know, Park Pilot insurance now covers cars and boats. So that photo that you're seeing is on my dining room table, and I'm obviously using a backdrop, and I have my studio lighting here. So trying to make sure that we can get everything done in a timely manner. So there's that. And then I think we also have a radio photo. I'm also working on the NX6 radio. There you go. So the NX6 radio is also a review I'm working on. So, as well as working here in my home office where I'm talking to you today, also taking photos and doing all the reviews. Also fortunate to have right next door to me is the park. Now I'm only 2 miles from AMA, but right next door to me is a park where I can fly small park flyers and run the truck. So we have another photo. There we are. That's at the park, and that's literally right next door to my house. And I just walk through the tree line, and I have a city park, fortunately, that I can use. Now, that photo was taken the end of last week. I think it was Friday. If I took the photo today, we'd have about 2 or 3 inches of snow on the ground. But just wanted to reiterate to everyone that we're here to serve the members. Just wanting to let you know that though most of us are working from home, but we have total access to phone and email and to answer any questions that you have. The other thing I wanted to share with you, and I did mention this previously, is that I'm bringing back a feature for 2021 called About Us. And hopefully you're familiar with the About Us feature. Basically, it's where we tell the stories of companies in our industry. And it started about 12 years ago when I was asked to do an article about Dubrow, who is celebrating their 50th anniversary. And I was trying to think of a creative way to tell their story, but also make it somewhat interactive. So the idea I had was that we would give products away from any company that we did a story on. So we've done several companies, and like Balsa USA, I had Joe Vermillion on the show. We did one with them where they gave away a kit of choice. But we've done Extreme Flight and 3D Hobby Shop and a lot of different companies over the last 12 years. But I think it's been about a year, maybe a little more, since the last time we did one. So I wanted to get back to doing that because I love telling stories, and I'm sure you love winning free products. So the first one that we're going to have, I actually conducted the interview on Monday of this week, and I wrote the story on Tuesday of this week, and that is Andy Clancy Designs, which is formerly known as Clancy Aviation. You probably are very familiar with the Lazy Bee and other versions like the Speedy Bee, and the countless different versions that they have. So we are going to have an article all about Andy and the company and how the Lazy Bee came to be. And as part of that, you can win. You can win so we'll have two winners, and each winner will be able to pick any kit that that Andy Clancy has designed, and is on the Andy Clancy Designs website. So I think there's the Speedy Bee and the Lazy Bee and the Glider Bee, and so the two winners will be able to pick. So basically, look for that article in the March issue of Model Aviation, which will be out digitally on February 15th. It'll be out in print toward the end of February, and you'll have about a month if you get the digital, you have about a month and a half. If you get the print, you'll have about a month to enter the contest, which basically is just to email me with the answer to a question that you'll find in the article, but the answer is not in the article. You have to go to the website to get the answer. So just kind of wanted to give you that preview that's the first one, but I'm lining up other interviews so we can tell the stories of some other companies in our industry. And with every one of these articles, you, the readers, can win products. So I'm excited to bring that back. And I think that things like the About Us and the I Am the AMA on the back page, where we tell the stories of aero modelers, and in this show, Model Aviation Live, I really enjoy the opportunity to talk to people and interview people. So really excited to bring that back and give you a chance to win. Also want to mention that, at this time of year, I'm from Florida originally, and I'm not a huge fan of flying outdoors when it's below freezing temperatures like it is today, about 28 degrees. So this time of year, I kind of get back to flying the flight simulator because it allows me to keep my skills up. And I'm really excited that with the newest version of Real Flight 9.5, that it has the AMA flying Site 3. So, we call that the International Aero Modeling Center, IAC for short. So you can actually, if you have Real Flight 9.5, or if you have 9, you can upgrade to 9.5 online for free. You can fly at Site 3, which is actually on the cover, as you can see it there. They also took a photo of our AMA truck, as you can see there. So you can fly at Site 3, and that site has hosted NEFI, the charity event that I ran for 10 years was at that site, and the NATS, and world competitions, and just pylon racing. I mean, there's been so many events that have happened there. We call that show center of all the flying sites at AMA. So if you have Real Flight 9, you can upgrade to 9.5, or if you get 9.5, you can fly at AMA. And I have it. I've been flying Real Flight since Real Flight 2, and I'm really excited this winter that I can fly at AMA. Also excited to share with you that I was made aware in the last week of another simulator called Wings. And it's a very inexpensive simulator that's the regular price on it is $40, but I think right now they're offering a special at $36. And you can download that simulator and use your transmitter to fly. And there's drone racing, and several companies in our industry they have their logos on the website that they must be supporting this in some way. So the developer reached out to me in the last week and asked if we would do a review on it and take a look at it. So I received a code to download a copy, and that's something that I'm looking forward to doing next week. I'm actually on vacation next week, and I'm looking forward to downloading the simulator and spending some time flying and learning all the features. And you can look forward to seeing a review of this in an upcoming issue of Model Aviation. But I just kind of wanted to share with you as well, because if you are interested in an RC simulator, or if you're in geographically located somewhere where you also maybe don't like to fly when it's below freezing, then this might be a great option for you, or Real Flight. So I'm excited to give that a try and report back and let you know what I find out about that. So before we get to our guests on this show, I want to briefly mention about our next show, which falls on January 15th. And this is going to be a first because that's also the same day that AMA Air is broadcast. So I will be a guest on AMA Air from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And then this show, Model Aviation Live, will take place from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. So for the first time ever, we're going to have back-to-back shows. So that'll be very interesting to do that for the first time. I mean, I know that we'll be able to do that, and hopefully you'll be able to spend both hours with us and see both shows. Another exciting thing about the show next month is that my guest is Dave Scott. And if you read Model Aviation, you probably are familiar with that name. Dave Scott runs the first U.S. flight school. And we have a picture of me with Dave. I actually attended the flight school about 12 years ago. And so that's me at the flight school in Wisconsin with Dave Scott. Now, Dave has written several articles for us about being more proficient with your flying. And he has also written manuals that that can be purchased on his website. So I'm excited to have him on the show and talk about improving our flying and allowing you to ask questions. And another thing I want to share with you is giving you a preview even further is that the show in February, I'm going to have my father on as my guest, and his name's also Jay Smith. And we have a photo of him and I that should come up on the screen here in a moment. So my father is holding the little Banshee. That's the green and white airplane. That's my father holding it. And then as you're looking at the screen, I'm to the right of him, or I'm on his left. But as you're looking at the screen, that's me just to the right of him. And that is at CEF, and that was during the Guinness World Record. And if you watch the first show that I did with Greg Gimlick, I talked briefly about that, about setting the Guinness World Record, and that I flew a Searmark Little Banshee. So that's it there. And it was interesting because Steve Chow, who owns Searmark, was watching the show live, and he commented in the chat section. So I'm excited to interview my father because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here in this job and working for AMA, because my father was a hobby shop owner previously. He's retired now, and he's been a club president. And obviously he got me involved in aero modeling and cars and boats and rockets and, plastic models. So I'm excited to talk to him about his experiences as a hobby shop owner and, being very involved in his local club. And he can give a little bit of insight about, my early days in the hobby. And talking about my early days in the hobby, I've been involved in the hobby since I was probably 5 or 6, but to focus more on electrics, because my two guests are very involved with electrics. I started flying electric model airplanes. I had previously had a Gentle Lady that was electric, but after the Gentle Lady, my first park flyer was a GWS Tiger Moth. And the reason that I got the airplane is it was really thanks to Chris Cianelli, who hosted a TV show called Radio Controlled Hobbies. And he also wrote for Model Airplane News and back then Backyard Flyer. And their very first issue, the GWS Tiger Moth was on the cover of that issue. And he also did a story on his show about park flyers. And I was really interested in getting a park flyer. And then I went to my father's hobby shop, and the first issue of Backyard Flyer was there. So I picked that up, took it home, read it cover to cover. And Chris Cianelli himself did a review of the Tiger Moth in that issue. And I really enjoy biplanes. So that made me decide I would want to get a Tiger Moth. I already had an Airtronics radio. So I bought the Tiger Moth, and then I bought the GWS back then would sell a kit that had the servos and the motor and the speed control and the battery. So I started out with a GWS Tiger Moth, which I still have a GWS Tiger Moth even today. And I basically, in essence, started a Park Pilot Club before Park Pilot was a thing. I actually got permission to fly at the middle school that was by my house, the actual middle school that I attended. And from there, I met other people on RC groups, and we would get up to 20 pilots that would show up there on the weekend to fly. And as I said, we had permission to fly there. And it actually led to, talking about the GWS Tiger Moth, it actually led to us getting to fly the World Tour GWS Tiger Moth. And if you don't know what that is, basically this GWS Tiger Moth was shipped practically all around the world, and people flew it and then put their names in a logbook, and then you sign the airplane. And we flew it at the middle school, and we signed it, myself and a few of the other pilots. And that airplane is now in the National Model Aviation Museum here at AMA. So it's kind of exciting that I flew that. But not only that, a few years later, they did another tour, and that was called the Wings Across America tour, where they flew a Stevens Aero Model Squirt. And that plane actually came to AMA, and I flew it as well. And that one is now in the museum. So, talking about park flyers and electrics, I've been involved for about 20 years, specifically with park flyers. I also went to CEF, the first CEF at Hodges Hobbies, which was the second CEF. And I went every year with my father for about the first 10 years of CEF. And obviously that photo I showed you was during the Guinness World Record, where we had 99 pilots. And interestingly enough, the person that came to certify that from AMA was Tony Stillman. He was the district VP at the time, and you probably know that Tony Stillman now is an AMA employee. But back then, Tony actually came to certify for Guinness that we set the record. And I think there was about 110 or 114 airplanes that took off. But when we had satisfied the flight duration, there was 99 airplanes left, and they staggered us. So we weren't all flying in the same airspace. And I happened to be at the highest altitude. So I was one of the last people to land. So at CEF on a grass runway, there was probably 100 or so airplanes already on the ground when I went to land. So it was quite a challenge to land that airplane. But I have to also tell you that I still have that airplane for sentimental value, and I've never flown it since that day, because things can happen, and I didn't want anything to happen to it. So I still have that airplane to this day, just to kind of remember setting that Guinness record. And if you go to Hodges Hobbies, because that's a flying field, they actually have a plaque there commemorating that event. So that's pretty neat. And last thing I'll say about Searmark is right above me here, that wing is for the Searmark Banshee. And I flew the little Banshee, and that airplane, that wing is for the regular size Banshee, which was involved with, it was very much like the E3D that Gary Wright designed. And I think he had involvement with that. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about my background in electrics and park flyers, because I'm really excited that our two guests today, we have one, which is Greg Gimlick, which you may know if you read the December issue, is just retired from writing the electrics column after 15 years. And then we have Terry Dunn, who's taken over our electrics column. And Terry's also written several articles for us, and he's done construction features. So I'm happy to bring both of them on. Let's welcome them to the show. Hi, Greg. Hi, Terry.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, Jay. Hey, Greg.
I'm excited to have you on and talk about electrics and talk about park flyers. And I know you were backstage, but you heard the story that I was sharing about some of my experiences and Chris Cianelli. And one thing I didn't say was I got to meet Chris Cianelli at iHobby and thank him for the articles that he wrote and the show that really got me excited about park flyers. And unfortunately, Chris passed away just months after the show. But I thanked him and told him that I felt he played a part in me working for AMA and getting my interest in electrics and park flyers. And he was really excited to hear that. And he said he couldn't wait to call his wife after the show and tell her that. And, sadly with him passing, I was so thankful to be able to tell him that. And Greg, you worked with him. Do you want to say a few comments about Chris?
Well, years ago when I first, I think the second electric column that I was writing was for Model Airplane News at one point, and Chris was there at that point. He was one of their editors. And I used to go up, make periodic trips up to Connecticut, Wilton, Connecticut, then where their headquarters were, and visit with the editor-in-chief at that point, was a good friend of mine. And that's how I got to know Chris. And we would go out, they would grab up a bunch of airplanes and things that they needed to shoot photos of, and we'd just all head to the field together. And Chris was a character. I mean, he was full of life all the time, and he was excited. It was just a character, just a character. I don't know how else to describe him. He was just a lot of fun. Yeah, I miss him.
Well, before we talk a little bit about your background, Greg, and your background, Terry, I was talking about the Clancy Lazy Bee and the other Clancy aircraft. And Greg, you have one behind you.
Yeah, I built this. This was a review I did many years ago when Andy first released these as a kit in 90. I want to say 94, 5, maybe 95. And he used to come up to KRC when we'd go up there, and while he was selling these kits in the pits, he would be set up under his Easy Up, and he'd actually be building these things. He and a friend would sit there, and they would frame up Lazy Bees faster than anything I ever saw. And, of course, be flying them, and, of course, they sold like hotcakes, too. So I flew this for a review. It was an RC report, and then I crashed it. We were playing around one time, and I just dumb-thumbed it. It sat in pieces up in the rafters of my shop for years. And last year, I finally decided it needed to come out and get resurrected. So I think the October 2019 electric column, is where I showed the rebuild of my Lazy Bee. And I talked to Andy then when I was doing it. We were kind of reminiscing, and he was saying then that his company would be up and going again, and he was going to be releasing the kits again. So I'm excited about these. It's a lot of fun when I take it out to the field. It just gets a lot of attention. It's just a silly little airplane. It's just great.
Well, to me, it's always looked like a flying school bus. The side windows make you feel that way.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's about what it looks like. They're just, people are a little afraid of them sometimes. They think they're going to be real twitchy, but they just fly great. And there's so many variations, and guys have done so many things to them. Everything from Jim Ryan out in Cincinnati flies his off skis all winter. I've got pictures of him in snow that I wouldn't think about going in, but he's there with his Lazy Bee still flying it in the snow. So, and there's giant bees and speedy bees and you name it, and there's some sort of bee made out of it now. So I'm glad to see him back. That's great.
What wheels do you have on yours, Greg?
These are actually my Trexlers had died over the years. They dry rotted and gone bad on me. These are a set of wheels off a Tundra Cub from Horizon, actually. They were just a tiniest bit bigger than the Trexlers, about the same weight, though, and everything. So I bought a set of extra wheels for my Tundra Cub, and I use those instead. And of course, they don't dry rot.
Right. Can you still get Trexlers?
Yes.
Yeah, you can bring your whole wallet, but you can still get them. And they're still, of course, the biggest mistake people used to make is they grab that little hose and they blow it up by mouth instead of using a retract pump. And once you get moisture inside those things, they're toast.
Right.
So Andy Clancy, his website's Andy Clancy Designs. He actually sells the Trexler tires and the pump on his website.
Okay, interesting.
So you can get them right from there. So Terry, have you ever had any of his designs?
No, I've never built one, but our mutual friend Thayer Sign at the last NEAT fair a few months ago, he had brought a Staggerbee, which is a biplane like a beach stagger wing, and his is really neat because he made a 3-motor version of it. There's a motor on a pod on each wing, and then one in the center. And it is just a really neat looking airplane, kind of an Art Deco design, like all of the Clancy designs. Just a really unique and comic book kind of caricature of an airplane. But it flew great on, get this, brushed Speed 400 motors.
Yeah.
Jim Ryan is still flying all his Warbirds on his original 6-volt brush Speed 400s. He's done brushless upgrades because that's what everybody wants, but he designed them around that motor, and Andy, of course, had flown a bunch of his on the old Speed 400s, and they still work.
Yeah, I picked up an old flying wing from about that same time period a month or so ago, and it had the Speed 400 in it. And rather than modernize anything, I actually soldered up a nickel metal hydride pack for it and flew it like I would have flown it 20 years ago. And it flew great.
Yeah. Well, it's fun. You start thinking about the things we used to do to them. Everybody said, well, you can't fly, 6/8 cells on that 6-volt motor. And we all had little timing tools. You jam in the back and twist
Right.
case a little bit and advance the timing on the motors, and those were good times.
Yeah, it's all about how much wear and tear you were willing to accept for performance.
Yeah, exactly. Like
You
one
know,
of my go
I
ahead.
was, I was going to say, I noticed in the chat we've got Ryan Ramsey with us, and he got his start doing reviews in Park Pilot. He worked with us in Park Pilot, and he has his own YouTube channel and does a lot of videos and reviews. And he helped me with a P-51 review in Model Aviation, and he's done a lot of Park Pilot reviews for us. So thanks for joining us, Ryan. And so let's talk. We want to talk obviously about electrics and the electric column. So let's start with you, Greg. So you have been writing for magazines for about 27 years, and you've written for Model Aviation for about 15 years. You were the electric columnist when I started at AMA 12 and a half years ago. So for those that don't know, can you just give us a quick overview of how you got started writing for RC Publications?
Well, it started. I did a club newsletter, and I always used to send the club newsletter to a couple of magazine editors or columnists that I followed, and one happened to have been Larry Marshall, was an electric columnist at RC Report after John Mountjoy and Charlie Spear. Charlie Spear had passed away, and John continued to column for a little bit, and then Larry took over, and I would send him my club newsletter. And on the side, we started talking about more electrics and that. He left there and went to Model Airplane News, and I got a call from Gordon, who was the editor and owner of RC Report, and just said, look, you're retired Army, I'm retired Army, now you work for me. And suddenly I was an electrics columnist, So, and the rest just kind of followed on. Some of the commercial magazines are kind of driven by consultants, and all of a sudden they say too many columns, so they'd say, well, we're going to cut some columns. And as soon as my column would get cut, another magazine would call and say, well, we want an electrics column. So, I kind of did that through Model Airplane News and Sailplane Electric, and back to Model Airplane News and some Electric Flyer magazine. And I've just stayed active. I just enjoyed being a columnist. That was always kind of the niche I found where I felt comfortable. I felt kind of a one-on-one relationship with readers who followed along, and it's been nice since my December retirement column came out. I've heard from a lot of people who say, I remember back when you wrote for RC Report. So some of these people have followed along for a lot of years, and it's just it's been a lot of fun, and it was. It never stopped being fun, really. It was just kind of starting to feel like maybe it was that time, and I, for months, have tried to figure out, who do I give my prized baby over to, and Terry's name kept coming up in my head, and I kept thinking, I wonder if he'd do it, and so it was just providence that he agreed to do it, so I'm tickled to death. Yeah. Well, Johnny Stansel, yeah, that was. He talks about the first electric plane. That was a cadet senior that I had a Sato 80 in, and I converted over to a Astro 40 geared on 21 NiCad cells. Johnny Stansel was probably there the day it came in on fire.
Oh, wow!
I had a shorted battery pack, but it smoked all the way in.
Well, so when I called Terry and asked him if he'd be interested in taking over the column, and I told him that, you had suggested that you really thought he would be a great fit for it, he was honored, but he wasn't quick to take the job. He told me he had to think about it. And, which I appreciate, because obviously a lot of people that write for the magazine have, other responsibilities, or, work outside of, have a full-time job outside of working for the magazine. So, I appreciate that Terry, that you agreed to take it on. And so, Terry, for those that don't know, tell everyone how you got your start in writing for magazines.
Let's see. Speaking of Thayer Syme, he was the editor at Fly RC for a long time, and so I think my first article was with him as my editor back in 2004. And I did a few how-to articles, and then I started doing some reviews, and I worked for Fly RC I think until about 2012. And during that time, I also started doing a column for Gordon at RC Report on electrics. And so I don't remember exactly the time frame, but somewhere around 2012, I stopped working for FlyRC and emailed Jay and asked if they needed somebody to do some articles. And I've been writing for Jay ever since then.
Well, we're happy to have you. Happy to have worked with Greg for so long. And Greg, you mentioned that you're retiring from the column, but you still want to do the occasional review or the occasional article. So you're not out of the magazine completely.
Oh no, I'm not out of the magazine. Unless you decide I'm out of the magazine, I guess. But you're kind of the man when it comes to that. I'm not done with the hobby by any means. I'm just kind of shifting back a little bit more on the retired side. I still want to do reviews. I enjoy doing the reviews and writing feature articles where I can. So I'm not disappearing completely. I'm just stepping back.
It's funny. You and I, Greg, have talked offline about how when you're writing about some of this stuff, it really changes your outlook when you go to the field or even in your workshop, kind of how you approach all this stuff. You have the mindset of what are you going to write about it? What are the interesting parts? I wonder if you'll ever be able to escape that side of it.
Well,
always be
I'm starting to actually, because the last of my articles have all been printed now. I don't think I've got anything left. Well, there may be one article left in the queue that hadn't been printed for Art Pilot, but so it's been a while since I've actually, because our deadlines are so far out. It's been a while since I've done that. So I've worked on 2 different projects just for me, and through one of them, I found myself taking photographs, checking lighting as I'm building, and saying, "Oh no, I missed this step." And then I thought, "Wait, I don't need a photograph of this. This isn't going anywhere other than me." So it's starting to settle in a little bit, but you're right. It's still in the back of my mind. And when you do a lot of them, and I've lost track of the number of articles and reviews, and the guys in my club have put up with me showing up out there with guys shooting video, and we monopolize the field. And Wayne Parrish is a good friend of mine for 30 years, has suffered along with me because I like doing my own photos and mostly my own video if I can. So he's the guy I've trusted over the years and called him and said, I know you got your own business. I know you need to be working. Can you run to the field and do this? And he's always done that for me and flown the airplane while I did my photos. So when I go to the field, I'm always feeling like, what am I shooting? Why am I here? It's like, ooh, so it'll be a while, a little PTSD from it.
That's okay. It's the good kind.
Oh yeah. It's good kind for sure.
Well, I mentioned on AMA Air earlier this week that the first time I met you, Greg, was at CEF, and that was before I was working for AMA. But I think at that time I was doing reviews for RC groups. I mean, I did do that previously, reviews for RC groups. And I think at that time I was doing reviews for RC groups. And I was mentioning that attending an event just to go fly is way different than attending an event to cover it. As I say, seeing an event through a camera lens is so much different because you've got to get all the pictures and you've got to get names and airplane information for the captions or whatever aircraft it is. And, it's work. I mean, it's fun, but it's work. And I think the same thing with reviews. A lot of times people say, it must be awesome to do these reviews. And it is, because it's good for us to, keep up on the hobby and learn about what's new. But, it's work because, as you said, you have to photograph steps and things that you want to point out. And at least for me, I make notes while I'm building and, take all the photos. And so, I would be curious to hear from both of you, what your thoughts are around that.
Well, go ahead, Greg.
As far as event coverage, I've said many times, even when I was doing it, if I didn't do another one, I'd be fine with it. Because when you're all done at the end of the day, you're up all night processing, going through your photos and your notes and thinking, oh man, I got a great photo, but I don't have a name or I don't have the details. And you're going back, and then you end up, it's easy to come home from an event with 5,000 photos because we're shooting digital now. And sorting through all that and paring it down to an article and saying, okay, here's 30 photos we'll use or 20 photos. It's a lot of work. And Terry's been there. We met at Rhinebeck.
That's right. Yeah, almost 10 years ago. I think it was 2012 for that. Yeah.
Yeah, about the time the hurricane had come through that area.
Was that when that was? Yeah.
I think so.
It all runs together now, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one time I've been to Rhinebeck, and I need to get back. That's a magical place.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So to answer your question, Jay, I found that when you try to tell people about the work involved in either event coverage or reviewing airplanes, you're not going to get a whole lot of sympathy. So,
oh, no.
So as much work as it might be, it's still a lot of fun. And so I don't typically mind it. But I agree with both of you. You go to an event with the intent of capturing the essence of the event for either a video or an article. It's a whole other thing than just being there for fun. So,
yeah.
And it's really kind of hard to do both. They're almost separate things. Yeah.
But you do get to find out there are some guys that like to play with you when you're covering an event. Like I've been to Joe Knoll a couple of times and covered it, and Kike Somonzini was there showing off an airplane one time, and I was shooting the photos. I was up there, and he says, can I do anything for you? And I said, well, if you could bring it in a little closer. Well, he'll balance it on the end of a long lens, I can tell you that. So it's guys like that, you find out, behind the scenes, they like to have fun, and they're an interesting bunch. And the guys who I met at a lot of the events who are Top Gun competitors and that sort of thing, when you get right down to it, they're like the guy at your local flying field. They're in it because they enjoy it just like we do. And we put them on pedestals and we think they're gods, and yet they're just, that's how I got to know so many of them, was covering events, and I'll never regret that.
Right. And I think that's probably the thing that strikes me the most is when I go to different events and I talk to people, invariably we have somebody mutual in common that we already know. So this is such a small, tightly knit community of people from, all over that it amazes me every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is a seemingly a small world. I got a call about 2 weeks ago from a gentleman who's interested in possibly donating an aircraft to our museum, and I got talking to him, and it turned out that he had just recently moved, but he previously lived in Florida, and he was flying at Walter Fuller Park, which was another place I flew outside of the middle school. And what was cool about Walter Fuller Park is it used to be the first ever airport in Pinellas County, and but then when Albert Whitted Airport came in, which had a paved runway, it was called Piper Fuller Field, and it was just grass. And they actually trained World War II pilots there. And Claire Chenault, who led the Flying Tuggers, did an air show there to raise money for war bonds. We actually were flying where the airport was. They turned it into a park, and there's a mall, and Admiral Farragut Academy, I think it's a naval, is there. Yeah, it's a naval academy. It's all there on the property that was once the Piper Fuller Field. And so, this gentleman calls me out of the blue 2 weeks ago, wants to donate this airplane, starts telling me some backstory, and he's like telling me that he flew at Walter Fuller Field, and he starts mentioning people that I flew with. In fact, he mentioned a gentleman who his name's Roland. He and his son Mike taught me how to fly, because when I was like 5 or 6, when I learned to fly, my dad thought it would be easier for someone else to teach me than him to teach me.
Yeah, I imagine.
Less prone to yell at you, probably.
Right. And so Roland, who owned a photo studio when I was young, he taught me a little bit about cameras and photography. And then, and he had a VW bus, and that's what we would take to the flying field because we could fit more airplanes in it. And so Roland, he still flies at Walter Fuller Park. And so this gentleman is talking about he flew there and the people he flew with. And it's like, wow, small world. But it's, I think that what's great about this hobby, or the best thing about this hobby, is the people. I mean, the models are cool. Innovation is cool, but it's about the people.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things that when I left the military a long time ago, that a friend of mine had warned me about, he says, once you retire, you'll never have relationships like you had in the military. And so I thought about that when I retired, but I have to disagree, because the friends I've made since I got really active, I was active while I was in the military in the RC world, but I kind of went full-time into it when I retired. And the friendships I've made in there are every bit as strong, and as some are better and more long lasting than the ones I had in the military. So, yeah, it's my wife says it's what has kept me sane since I retired from the Army.
Does she use air quotes, sane?
Oh, yeah, pretty much. So you've seen it,
Yeah.
I think in essence, she just sits back and kind of giggles that I'm off playing with my buddies at the toy airplanes,
Well, so I had mentioned before you both joined me on the show today about that the GWS Tiger Moth was my first park flyer. And before that, I had a Gentle Lady that had a brushed motor, but it was just on or off. There was no speed control. So I'll ask you first, Greg, what was your first park flyer?
First park flyer. Go ahead, Terry. I'm thinking. I'm trying to think what in the world. Well, I guess what would qualify as a park flyer was probably the Tower Hobbies electric cub. They used to do a little 6-cell, 15-minute timer electric cub. Had no speed control. You just flipped a switch, you flew it until your battery dumped and landed. I think that would probably be my first park flyer.
Okay. Mine would be similar. It was a Goldberg Electra that I got on consignment at a hobby shop. And same thing, it didn't have a speed control. So you flew it until the battery died. But with an Electra, the prop didn't have to be turning a whole lot to keep that thing airborne. So by the time you landed, that battery was just dead flat. And of course, you had to run over real quick because once it hit the ground, the prop was still trying to turn because there was no switch there. So and it was very interesting to manage that. And it's trying to land it in a park, you really had to find ways to kill the energy to get it into a small space. But I learned a lot of lessons with that airplane, both about electrics and flying in general. So it was a good experience.
Well, that's the way the Cub was with me. It convinced me that, there could be something to electrics. It was underpowered. You had to work it the whole way, but it was my test bed to learn about electrics. And, the first big upgrade is I put a servo and a 2-pole switch on it so I could turn the motor on and off. And you just had to be ready because when you hit the switch, it was full throttle, and it would torque on you. Yeah.
So for those of us, all three of us and many people obviously who started in the earlier days of electric aircraft, and, we were using NiCad batteries and nickel metal hydride batteries. And, then there was the switch to brushless power and lipos. I remember my first lipo I ever bought was an Apogee brand name, and I bought it at Ceph, and it was a 2-cell. I think it was like around maybe 480 size capacity, and I bought it for my GWS Tiger Moth because I'd been flying it on nickel metal hydrides that were only 300 milliamp hour, and much lighter. And also my first technically brushless motor was actually a CD-ROM motor that a gentleman named Glenn, who we would go to these computer shops and buy CD-ROMs that didn't work anymore for just a few dollars each. And we'd give them all to Glenn, and he would wind CD-ROM motors and give them to us. So we would buy the drives, give them to him. He'd pick the best ones and then pay us back by giving us a CD-ROM motor. So my Tiger Moth had a CD-ROM motor and had the Apogee battery. And then real quick, going again about Small World. So I did not know this. When I was flying with Glenn and Glenn gave me a motor, I did not know that I used to race RC cars with Glenn when I was like 8 years old. And he didn't recognize me because, I was an adult at this point when I flew with Glenn, and I was a kid when I raced with him. And one day he's talking about how he used to rewind the motors for the electric cars when he was sponsored by Bowlink, and he used to race at a mall parking lot in Tampa. And I'm like, I was sponsored by Bowlink, and I raced at a mall parking lot in Tampa. And he's like, so my father's name is Jay and my name is Jay. He goes, "You're little Jay,
Little Jay,
you're little Jay," and Small World. I mean, I'd been flying with him for like almost a year and didn't know that we used to race cars together because he didn't recognize me, and I was young then and I didn't remember him at that time. So as it turns out, I go back to my photo album and I find a picture of him and I right next to each other on the driver's stand at a race, and I send it to him, and he goes, "I only had a beard for 6 months, and in that photo, I had a beard." So, go figure that you had a photo like that. So, it's interesting, Small World stuff. But so tell me, both of you, please tell me about your experiences going to, brushless and lipo, and what airplane was that in, or how did you make that conversion?
Well,
Go ahead, Greg.
Going to brushless for me happened at KRC when it was still down at the old Buck Lee field. Tom Samato from Maxim Motors and Dave Palumbo from Aviox were the only two brushless motor guys at the time. Each one of them would back their car up to the flight line, throw a card table out, throw their products out. And then Astro Bob was there with the Astro line of Cobalt motors and that. And they did their best to sell us on the idea of brushless motors and this and that. And finally, I ended up buying a Maxim to put in. I forgot what it was that I put it in now. It was, I know at one time I ended up in my Bristol, my first Balsa USA Bristol. And that may have been what I bought at the Target for initially. So that was my brushless thing, was those two companies. And then, of course, the others, came on board. And here we are. Jerry?
Well, for me, the first brushless I remember was it would have to be, we talked about Gary Wright's E3D a little while ago and how it relates to your Banshee. So when that airplane was popular, I bought one of the kits from Gary, and I decided I'm not going to take the cheap route on this. I'm going to go ahead and put brushless stuff in it. And he designed that airplane around a geared brush motor. Right. So it was already an upgrade to go brushless with it. So I bought an Aviox motor with a gearbox, and I believe I bought it from Sal at Northeast Sailplanes.
Yeah.
And also, I think on that same airplane, I bought my first LiPo, which I used two 3-cell 2100 Thunder Power batteries in parallel to be able to balance the airplane with it. And I forget what the discharge rating was on those first LiPos, 8C or 10C.
Oh, low, yeah.
Yeah. So, what's a 3-cell 2200 cost these days? $15-20?
Yeah.
For those, those early ones, I remember paying $75 a piece and feeling like I was stealing them at that price.
Yep. So. My first LiPo pack was actually sent, I can't remember the company's name now. They sent me 6 cells to make up 2 packs. And when they sent them to me, they were worth about $300. Right. And they were just the envelopes with the solder tabs. That was it. And they basically said, well, this is it. They're like 8C. Discharge should be okay. Careful when you solder them. And that was it. It scared me to death. I called Doug Ingraham, who used to do all the speed control programming and design for Astroflight and that. And he's an electrical engineer. And I said, Doug, I just got these. What do I do? And so he kind of, handheld me through there via email. And I didn't burn the house down, didn't burn the airplane up, but it was like handling nitro to me. Of course, we didn't even know about balance taps or anything at that point. You just soldered them up like you would a battery and flew them and hope they didn't puff.
Right. Yeah, I was going through a drawer the other day and I found my early Astroflight LiPo charger that didn't have balance leads. They had the separate blinky that you would plug in if your battery had balance taps at all.
Yeah. So blinky balancer. Yeah.
I've got two of those Astro chargers in boxes out in my garage. It's just, I don't know why I still have them, but they're there.
Yeah. Memories.
Yeah, that's it.
You talked about, I talked about the E3D. You mentioned the E3D. You mentioned Gary Wright, and going to Ceph. In the early days of Ceph, Gary would come and he would bring the E3D XL, which is a giant scale electric. At the time, that was the largest electric I'd ever seen, and I built 2 of the. Well, I built one. I had 2 of the E3D minis, the kits, and I bought 2. One as a backup, and someone on RC Groups really wanted the mini, and they had the ARF E3D, and they said, I'll trade you even for the ARF for the mini. I really want the mini. So I traded them the mini, and I got the ARF, and it's still unbuilt, brand new in the box. It's one of those, for one of these days in the closet. Right. So I told Gary that a few years ago it was at IRCHA, the helicopter event at AMA, and he was there with Hobbyco and Futaba, and I told him that I still had a brand new E3D ARF. He's like, I'd love to get my hands on that. The only bad part was shortly after I got rid of the other kit, I was flying the E3D Mini. I put 6 flights on it. That was at Walter Fuller Park. And on my last flight, all of a sudden, I have no control. I was going straight vertical, and I have no control, and it just falls off, and I watch it crash. And this is 72 megahertz, and I'm holding my radio up. I don't know what's wrong, and I go to the crash site, and the antenna was detached from the receiver. Now, I don't know. Maybe it happened with the crash, but it also would make sense why it had no control. I don't know how the antenna came loose because I had 5 good flights, but it was pretty damaged on the 6th flight, and I was kind of bummed about it. So I ended up giving it to my dad, and he fixed it, and then he flew it because I had the Banshee, which to fly, which is similar, and this one that's a little bit bigger. But it's interesting. I was talking to Michael Ramsey maybe a couple of years ago, who was the editor when I started, and we were talking about how events like CEF and other events, Arizona Electric Festival and the Neat Fair, all these events that were born out of people's interest in getting together like-minded for electrics. And he said, electrics are so popular now, we should have glow-only events. That's what
you talk about the E3D and Gary Wright. There's 2 times that I've been sought after for advice from somebody that were my epic fails, and Gary Wright's one of them. That when he was designing his E3D, he emailed me and said, I'm doing a power setup for it, and this is what I'm doing. And I really didn't know Gary from anybody, so he was telling me about it. And I said, yeah. He said, I want to use these truck motors. And I said, whatever you do not go down this ferrite truck rotor mode. And I said, people, you only get so many flights. You got to put the brushes if they wear out. He said, yeah, but it's only like $20, and it'll be real cheap. And I said, Gary, whatever you do, don't do this. Here's a couple of motor suggestions. They're cobalt motors. Save yourself a lot of grief. Well, of course, the joke was on me. He did the truck motors, and of course, he rebuilt the truck motors regularly, and they performed just beyond anything I could ever imagine. So he used to like to tweak me about that. And then one day I was driving up to Muncie. I was going up to the Nats, and my cell phone rings, and it's Gary saying, you ended up being right, sort of. He said it flew great, but he says, I'm so tired of people asking me, what good motor would you put in it? And of course, the other one was, when Patrick Del Castillo, before Castle Creations, he was talking to us about, on the old FidoNet, I guess, talking about getting into speed controls. And 2 of us advised, whatever you do not get into this business on speed controls. You'll go broke. And of course, now Castle Creations is so. Patrick reminds me of that occasionally. Years later, he still says, "That was good advice you gave
me." When you talk about Castle, the other thing I think about is Berg receivers.
Yeah.
Because Castle bought Berg receivers, and I think within the first year of them buying Berg receivers, Spectrum came out with 2.4 gigahertz, and people started migrating. So Berg was a great selling receiver, but the timing, I think, was unfortunate for Castle because people started to go to 2.4.
Yeah, well, timing, like so many businesses, timing's everything, and we really went through a period of just astronomical technological change. That things happen, and for the better.
Yeah, and I think your experience at CEF with the world record attempt is a good example of that, because I was there for that too. And I seem to remember how much trouble they went through trying to integrate all the different radios to get 100 people in the sky at the same time. So yes. A lot of people were still on 72. They had people on 50 megahertz. Yep. They had people on 2.4 gigahertz. It was really an ordeal. That was probably the biggest hurdle in the whole thing.
Yes. It sure was.
And then comparing that to Flight Test or Flight Fest, where I was a couple of years ago, and they just had 150 airplanes in the sky. No big deal. Just everybody throw up your plane. And it was funny that I found that I had a lot of latency with my radio, but it still worked. I didn't have to go grab a pin from the frequency board.
Right. So, yeah.
One
year at Joe Null, they did that with when the DSM-2 first came out. And they said you could only have, I forgot what it was. There were just so many.
I think it was 40.
Yeah, something like that. And they put up 70 some odd T-28s all on, and I don't know how many crashed because they had so many, but it really was a successful flight, and it was interesting to watch.
I was at that. I was there that year at Joe Knoll
Were
when
you?
they all the T-28s. Yeah, I was going to say I was an early adopter of the DX6, the first one that was for park flyers only, and
Right.
that's what I used at CEF when I did the world record. I used the DX6, and then when they came out with the DX7, that was full range. I went ahead and got the DX7, and I gave the DX6 to my father because even then I was working in the hobby shop. My dad was no longer involved. My father was. They had two stores, and just real quick, my father was working 6 days a week at one of the two stores, and it just kind of burned him out on the hobby completely, And so he decided, it was time. He didn't want to, not do the hobby ever again, and he just decided it was time to. So he sold out and sold his half of the hobby, and but I was working in the hobby shop, and so I went from the 6 to the 7, and then I also worked in the other hobby shop that was also in Pinellas County. Was called Archie's, and we used to race boats with Archie too. So I knew Archie since I was very young, and the person who Archie's is no longer around, but the person that runs Phil's hobby shop, the shop that my father started with Phil, his name's Brian. He now owns it because sadly Phil passed away. And Brian is about 2 years older than I am, and we used to hang out at all the boat races together because Brian and his dad would go to boat races, and now he, is the owner of Phil's hobby shop. So it's just, again, it's just kind of interesting, small world kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
Well, we've got a few minutes, but we're almost to an hour. I wanted to, we're talking about events. I wanted to ask both of you, what was your first big event that you attended? And let's go with Terry first this time.
Define big.
Well, yeah, maybe 50 or more.
Okay. Well, there's an event in Houston. Well, I think last year was the final year of it. Maybe it'll come back, called Best Electrics in South Texas. And for a long time there, they were getting 50 to 100 people. And I was going to that every year. And that's where I met I lived in Houston at the time, met a lot of the Dallas Flyers. There was a really big group of electric flyers in that area that always came together for this event. So it was fabulous for that. And that's actually how I met one of my co-podcasters, Lee Ray, at that event. So, and in terms of really big events, CEF was the first one I went to. And that was just kind of a whole other layer of scale on that one.
Hey, Greg, before you answer, I got to say, we have a comment here. Talk about small world. It says, I'm from Pinellas and used to buy at Archie's. So we have someone watching who bought at one of the hobby shops I worked at. So again, small world.
Yeah. Neat.
So yeah, Greg, what was your first big event?
First big event was probably KRC, I guess, when it used to be in Quakerstown before it moved over to Allentown and that. So KRC would be my first big one. I was at the first CEF before it moved over to Maxfield. Went to all the CEFs up until just a few years ago. And biggest ever is obviously Joe Knoll.
Yeah, Joe Knoll is obviously a phenomenal event. I've been there twice, and it's certainly a Pat is so gracious. I mean, everyone there is just so welcoming and friendly, and it's a great event, and it's interesting to see how it's grown. With the electric line and the helicopter line and the control line that they're flying, so you can find a little bit of everything.
Yeah, it's a week long. You need to take a week to be there. It's if you're going to see everything and do the stuff that you want to see and not kill yourself. And I'm fortunate because for me it's only about a 4.5 hour drive, so it's great. I scare my wife. I keep saying we're going to buy a house in Woodruff so I can fly there every day.
But right. So we've talked a lot about some of our backgrounds and some of our experience, with electrics. And I think one thing that would be interesting to share, and, I'm sure the stories of why are similar, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, but both you, Greg, and Terry, you're both electric only now. You don't do glow and you don't do gas. Is that right?
Generally, that's true for me. I have a gasser. And I have some nitro motors, especially half A, but yeah, 95% of the time I'm flying electrics.
Yeah, I did a gas Hellcat last year, and that was probably the first time I've dabbled back in gas in I don't know how many years. It's been forever. And I enjoyed it and ended up converting it over to electric. But I had curiosity about these small, 15 cc gas engines and that. So I did it that way, and it was good. I enjoyed it. I like it all. Electrics happens to be my love, but at the same time, it's whatever gets your airplane in the air. As far as I'm concerned, that's what matters. So.
Right.
Right. Yeah. You definitely, whatever power system you appreciate, that's, fine. There's no problem. But I was going to say, I'm sure you would both say part of the reason that you're either all electric or mainly electric is just the simplicity. You don't have, like I store, as you can see, I store my airplanes in the house. And so if you, fly glow and gas planes a lot, I do have a glow plane and a gas plane, but I don't keep them here in the house. But the simplicity, ease of cleanup, that's what I was saying. What probably the reasons you would say that you either are predominantly electric or all electric are probably similar reasons that other people choose electric. And, it used to be in my mind, that electrics were relegated to park flyers, or then it started to get a little bit larger, a little bit larger. And then it kind of was, in my mind, electrics for the smaller stuff, glow for the slightly larger stuff, and then gas for the really big stuff. But now you could fly anything you want electric.
Yeah, my biggest electric's 110 inches. So, and I've had a couple of that size, 50 cc type planes that were electric. And I understand why guys do planes that size with gas. There are some challenges and some differences in doing those big planes, but certainly anything you want to fly. I know Terry's done all sorts of sizes.
Right. And actually, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, Jay, because I got into electrics around 1999, a little bit earlier than that, actually. I graduated college in 97, moved to Houston to start a job there, and I had brought an RC airplane with me and also a couple of the buggies that I used to race. And I was living in an apartment, and it was a PT-20, Great Plains PT-20, had an OS-20 on it. Not a whole lot I can do in the apartment with that. So one day I'm like, I wonder if I can take the buggy motor off, put a propeller on it, and fly this thing. And I knew absolutely nothing about how any of that would work. I just figured, why not put a propeller on a motor? What could possibly go wrong? But the stars aligned, and it actually worked out well. And so the internet's coming along at that time, and electric's really starting to happen then. And so there's this cadre of people who are figuring out and explaining to people how electrics work. And so I got in at that level, and it was the complexity of it, the puzzle of making these things work and work well that really drew me in. Not so much the simplicity, but the complexity of it.
Well, and that's how I hate to say that I was getting bored with the hobby. I was putting out an air. I was building for other people at the time, and I was getting kind of bored with the whole thing. When this buddy of mine threw the electric cub into my shop floor and said it didn't work, I could have it. He hated it. And when I tinkered with that, all of a sudden that little spark of interest came. I thought, well, this is a challenge, and so that was how what brought me into the electrics was I was flying all sorts of glow and gas. This just proved to be something I'd never done and was something to figure out. So it really sparked my interest back, and it's never quit.
Right. So if you want to take that Electra as an example, I flew that Electra with a direct drive 05 motor, and it flew, but it was kind of lethargic. And then you put a gearbox on it with a 12-inch propeller, and all of a sudden it'll climb at a 45-degree angle. Like, oh, okay, there's some trial and error you can do here and really experiment with things and see actual differences. So it was like a science experiment every time you went to the field.
Exactly. That's the best way to put it.
Well, you make a good point, Terry. I guess, as I'm thinking about the simplicity of electrics, I'm thinking more recently and more modern because, before LiPos were readily available, we were taking like cordless drill batteries and taking those apart and these CD-ROM motors. And there was it was exciting, and there was a lot of experimentation. How could we lighten the airplane and get more power? But obviously at this point, it's a lot easier to figure out the right power system and the right battery system. And, I was using like ElectroCalc and MotoCalc, and I know Greg uses those, and you probably use those too, Terry. And,
sure.
Still use it some to this day, but, in most cases, the manufacturer gives us recommendations, and, you're kind of, set up for success, so to speak. And so there's not quite as much of a learning curve, if you will.
Right.
Go ahead, Terry.
Well, I was going to say, I think with the turnkey aspect of electrics now, it brings in pilots who aren't necessarily tinkers, but are fabulous airplane flyers or quadcopter flyers or helicopter flyers. It's allowed other people to come into the hobby that wouldn't have come before because you had to be a tinkerer. So yeah. I think it's allowed more people to come in, and we're better off for having them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's there's so many choices. Sometimes that makes your head spin a little bit. But now you have, like you say, vendors, manufacturers that have such good recommendations. And it used to be we fought the idea that guys coming into electric say, but I don't want to have to know math. I don't want to be a scientist and all those things. So and some of us were guilty probably of just through our excitement burying them with, this is how you figure it out. And you get the spreadsheets out and you start doing this stuff. And so we kind of made that problem ourselves, I think, a little bit. And now it's gotten to where, people don't have to know all that stuff or how to figure the math out. The information's there for them.
All right.
Well, I've said it before on this show, and I've said it in the magazine, in my column. I think that it's great that we have all the options that we have, the different power systems and the different, control line and free flight and all the different versions of RC and helicopters and drones, because it just makes it available to everyone, as you said, and you can get in very easily and have success, because we all know, all of us know that if your first experience is a bad one and you crash that airplane and that you spent, especially if it was something you built and you crash that airplane, it may impact your future in the hobby. So I think it's great, if you're more into flying and you don't either want to build or you don't have the time to build, that's there for you. If you want to build, that's there for you. Any kind of airplane you want to fly, that's there for you. I just think it's great. I mean, I think it's amazing because we want to make this hobby available to everyone. And I find that the first time someone, does a quick buddy box flight or actually takes control of the airplane, I mean, we all, have that appreciation for aviation. You see that smile on their face, and I actually flew. So, to your point, I think it's all great. It doesn't matter if it was ready to fly out of the box or someone else built it for you, or you're a craftsman and you build it yourself. I mean, Terry, you've come up with some pretty unusual airplanes for us, and the Parallax. And now you have the yin yang that people are going to see here soon. I mean, again, that's, right there.
That's just wrong.
That's the exact desired response I want from that.
Yeah. So I think, I think it's great to allow for that. And
see, it's stuff like that's why I wanted him.
Right. Well, so let's give a really quick sneak peek. So I've already seen Terry's first column, which it's in the February issue that comes out in January. And the one thing I'll just quickly say is you talked about watt meters, Terry, and you mentioned some of the watt meters that you own, you showed some pictures, and it made me smile because my first watt meter was a watts up.
All right.
Meter, and those were pretty early on too. And my favorite color is green, and mine's green. They even had them in different colors back then. But, again, not that I to the point of your column, a watt meter is just as important today as it was before. But I think everybody used to have them. I mean, in the early days of electrics, everybody had them.
Yeah, either because they knew enough up front to get one, or they had burned off enough electronics to realize they had to get one. So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I was glad to see the watt meter come out, because the first thing I used was a shunt that Tom Hunt made and just handed out to a bunch of us so we could use our multimeters to do stuff beyond the 10 amps or whatever the multimeters were capable of.
Right. Well, it's a little bit past the hour, so we should wrap up. But I want to take this opportunity again, Greg, to thank you for 15 years of writing the column in Model Aviation and 27 years of contributing to different magazines in the hobby. And like we said, I mean, you're just taking a break from the column. People can still see articles from you in the magazine, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. And Terry, I'm so excited that you took over the column, and I think that both you bring a large skill set and information to our readers. So I appreciate that, because again, as I always say, I think Model Aviation is great because it brings all aspects of aero modeling to our readers, no matter what your interest is. But it's also challenging because there's so many interests. So it's important to have subject matter experts that can talk to each segment that they're interested in. So I'm really excited to work with you, Terry, in that capacity, because you've done a great job with feature articles and reviews and stuff. And so definitely looking forward to people reading your final column, or I'm sorry, your
What?
Right? That was quick.
You have something you want to tell me?
Yeah. So,
Boy.
I want to give both of you a chance, if there's anything else before we wrap up that you'd like to add or share.
Go ahead,
Greg. Well, okay, I'll go. I want to say thanks to you, Jay, for the opportunity, and thanks to you, Greg, for choosing me. It's like Jay mentioned before, I think it's a great honor, and I'm going to do my best to uphold the standards that you established for that column. And I think people will find out pretty quickly that I'm a fan of early electrics, and by early, I mean turn of the century type stuff. So all the stuff we talked about before, brushed motors and NiCad batteries, I really like getting that stuff and modernizing it. So don't be surprised if you see a lot of content based around that sort of stuff.
That's great. Yeah, and that's going to be popular too, because you'd be surprised, and you're going to start getting emails that I was getting, and you'll be surprised at how much interest there is right down that road. So that's great. I don't have too much to say. I mean, I've pretty much said it all. I just appreciate everybody reading over the years. I appreciate the Bob Kopsky who came before me, and Keith Shaw who mentored me, and guys who emailed me, just readers emailed me and set me straight for mistakes I'd made, and they picked up over the years. Jay, I appreciate, you've been great to work for. I've worked for you longer than I've worked for any editor. I guess you've outlasted so many editors in other places too. But, it's been my pleasure, and it was an honor to have the pages given to me, and to be able to share what I thought I knew and tried to learn along the way. And it's been the best experience of my life. And I'm just tickled to death that, Terry, you decided to take it over, because I was so afraid that you wouldn't. And then I was going to worry about who would. So I feel so good about it. And that really made my retirement that much easier, my decision to back off a little bit. So I just appreciate everybody, the AMA, and all the members and the people who have made this possible for me to do.
Well, again, thank you so much. And, it's interesting, the point you made about working with me the longest. I've been at AMA now for 12 and a half years. And Rob Kurek, who previously was the director of publications, he's now our communications director. He's been at AMA about 28 years. And he said, as far as he knows, I'm the longest running editor that the magazine's ever had since 1975. So Model Aviation, began as a standalone magazine in 1975, and it looks like I've been the editor the longest. And as someone who's been in this hobby all their life, I'm thankful every day to get to do this job and share the passion that I have for aviation and aero modeling. And like I mentioned, I mean, my father has been a member for most of his whole life, and he gets the magazine, and all my flying friends in Florida that I talked about, and everybody I've met along the way. And, so my goal is just to put out the best magazine that we possibly can. And I'm thankful to tell you that when people have concerns about the magazine, the only concern is generally is, like maybe they might say something to the effect of, I fly control line carrier, and I'd like to see more control line carrier content in the magazine. That's really the only feedback about something that someone would like to see more of or changed in the magazine. And, I explained to them, like I said before, that, it's a benefit of our magazine being able to cover all aspects of aero modeling, but it also means that, we might not get it all in every month. So speaking of Rob, the advice he passed on to me and to some of our members, that when they say that is, don't judge us on a single issue. Give us a few issues or give us the whole year, because we're going to have that content. I mean, we have 29 columns right now in Model Aviation. They don't all run every issue. We run about 12 per issue, but we have 29 different columnists to make sure we touch on all the special interests, and we try to also get feature articles. So, I'm going to do my best to give everyone the content that they want, and feedback is very important. And that's part of the reason why I want to do this show, to have another way to connect with our members and our readers and continue to make the magazine the best it can be. And all the subject matter experts and all the contributors help me do that, because there's no way that I can be a subject matter expert on everything. So thank you both for all that you do, all that you have done. Thank you for being on the show. And just a quick reminder that the next show is January 15th, and it's going to immediately follow AMA Air. So I will be a guest on AMA Air, and then I will also then host the show. So that'll be a great show. And we have Dave Scott on, who can answer all your questions about flying proficiency and any tips or tricks that you might look for. So thanks again, and we'll see everybody next week. Or I'm sorry, next month.
Bye.
Bye.